Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment as people settle into their Zoom boxes. This is Jeff Katzman. I'm your host today with our hub team. You are in the Treasure of Ordinary Psychotherapy program. All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining our call today that we are calling TOP. We created this idea, the Treasure of Ordinary Psychotherapy. And we, as a hub team here, have gone through many iterations of a name, all emerging out of really a joy that we've discovered as a hub team, riffing together about the remarkable experience of being understood and held by another human being. And how, in our quest to learn valuable evidence-based therapies at times, we can forget who we are as people and the remarkable value of bringing ourselves to the therapeutic relationship. So this is not about self-disclosure, this program, but rather how do we communicate a sense of being real and authentically engaged and collaborating with and holding the people who we are working with. Each of us will share a particular idea during our different sessions over the next 5 programs, and that will happen the first half hour. Then our hub team here will riff about the ideas as a group for about 10 minutes, and then questions. If you put questions along the way in the chat, we will get to as many as we can in the final 15 minutes. And if we don't get to the question, we'll try to use these as springboard for future presentations over the weeks to come. It may be that one question is so deep that it takes our whole entire time and we riff away at it, and we will just see how this goes, trying ultimately to sustain a sense of being real with everyone here, spontaneous and present and authentic. So for this reason, we've elected to meet in the form of a meeting rather than a webinar, so we can be with each other. We never anticipated such a great turnout. I think we have 850 signed up today. And in this meeting format, really, we can all be with each other, but we've muted microphones so that we can hear the speaker clearly without distraction. Also, if you can have your camera on, that's fantastic. It's an hour that we can all meet and see one another and take advantage of that, and feel free to eat on camera. It's lunchtime for many, or even dinner or breakfast for others, depending where you are in the world, so go for it. And a link to an evaluation survey with Dr. Allen's notes will appear in your browser at the conclusion of the program. Please fill this out for CME or CEU credits if you'd like them. Also, importantly, disclosures. Dr. Allen is the author of several books and receives some royalties from the American Psychiatric Publishing, and those relevant financial relationships have been mitigated. And no planners of this activity have indicated a relevant financial relationship with an ACCME defined ineligible company whose primary business is producing, marketing, selling, reselling, or distributing healthcare products used by or on patients. And with that, it is my great honor to introduce what we call our hub team, the group that's put this together and leading the way for this program. First, Dr. John Allen is a clinical psychologist. He'll be speaking to us today. He retired in 2016 from his position as clinical professor of psychiatry in the Menninger Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the Baylor College of Medicine. He has continued to teach and consult and write books in his, quote, retirement. And Ross Ellenhorn, PhD, is a sociologist who is also trained as a psychotherapist. He's the owner of Ellenhorn, the most robust program in the US, focused on providing intensive psychiatric and psychosocial care for individuals in their homes and communities. His current writing is about the intersection between interpersonal experiences of holding and larger societal and cultural forms of holding, and the later's form as a buffer to loneliness and the emergence of totalitarianism. Michael Grote is, Dr. Grote is the president and CEO of the Lindner Center for Hope, an affiliate of the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine, where he's also an associate professor of psychiatry and neuroscience. He trained in psychodynamic psychotherapy at the Austin Riggs Center and has spent his career working in hospitals and residential programs, including the Menninger Clinic, Silver Hill Hospital, and Cooper Reese. He has a passion for collaborative, flexible care that meets people where they are in a compassionate manner. Dr. Robin Kissel is faculty at UCLA Department of Psychiatry and training and supervising analyst at the new Center for Psychoanalysis in Los Angeles. Most importantly, the director of the Mentalization Initiative out of LA, which is a nonprofit aimed at teaching the ideas of mentalization. That group has also put together a 7-week virtual program that you can, we'll put the link to that in our chat as well. And I should have said, I'm Jeff Katzman. I'm a psychiatrist and the director of education at Silver Hill Hospital, and our initiative that we call SHARE, the Silver Hill Academy for Research and Education, and affiliated with the University of New Mexico and Yale Department of Psychiatry, and passionate about psychotherapy, psychodynamic psychotherapy, and improvisational theater. So with that, I'm going to turn to you, Dr. Grote, to say a few words about our speaker before Dr. Allen begins.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. Wonderful introductions. And just such an honor to welcome all of you today, to have 382, as I see it, participants coming together as a community to think together about the work of psychotherapy and the really powerful ways we can connect with people in therapy. So I have the enormous honor and privilege today of introducing John, who I consider a dear friend, mentor, and a kindred spirit. John played a direct role in recruiting me to the Menninger Clinic when I left the Austin Riggs Center and was looking for ways to use the training in a hospital-based system, extremely difficult to find. But when I reached out to John Allen, there was a position opened, and John called me immediately. We began a conversation and a relationship. And one of the things that I think has defined the relationship with John that's relevant to the talk today is that John has an incredible sensitivity and sensibility around what it means to navigate the boundaries of paradigms. John is one of the most educated people I know in the realm of psychotherapy research. He has studied and reviewed the research in psychotherapy extensively. He's done more than that, though. He has thought a lot about the philosophical underpinnings of the psychotherapeutic relationship, has studied history and philosophy, and has really navigated this terrain. And through it all, he's had this remarkable capacity to be within the material, to be immersed, and tend to step outside of it. You know, Thomas Kuhn, who was a philosopher, scientist in 1962, wrote about the nature of scientific revolutions and talks about liminal leadership, which is the ability to be within a paradigm, to observe the paradigm, but then to question the paradigm and be able to step outside of it. And to me, John is that kind of leader. He's a person who has, as he's going to talk about today, has traveled the realm of psychotherapy in depth for the last 40 plus years as a clinical psychologist, as an author, and as a writer. And I think he has bravely been willing to question and examine, you know, some of the, at times, maybe foreclosure that happens when we say, oh, we have our model, and we stick to it very rigidly. John is willing to say, hold on a minute here, let's take a step back. So I think that's what John's going to do today, is to collectively lead us through taking a step back, reflecting together. And I think you will find, as I have through my relationship with John, an incredible human being who provides a spaciousness of thinking, a spaciousness of empathy, and an erudition that's, you know, really nearly incomparable in my view, from my experience. I know that's going to embarrass John a bit, but it's a great honor to welcome John. He was at my wedding. He was there when my daughter was born. I feel like, you know, he's been with me in these pivotal moments, and it's an honor to be with you in this pivotal moment of introducing you.
Well, thank you, Michael. One of the ideas I like is making attempts. All we ever do is make an attempt. So I'm going to make an attempt to do what Michael said. And I'm honored by that, because I would actually, you've put it beautifully, Michael, and I'd just like to reciprocate and say what a fabulous opportunity it's been to work with you and be your friend for all these years. It's been wonderful. And I'm very honored to be a part of this group and thank Jeff for inviting me. I think of us as the Silver Hill Hospital Quintet. And I do want to bring up jazz. I'm a jazz pianist and composer, and I think jazz is a great metaphor for psychotherapy. And what I have in mind, for those of you who are not familiar with jazz, is what I call classic jazz. I grew up with it in the 1960s. Jazz has a lot of structure, actually, a harmonic structure, the use of scales, time signatures, rhythm, and especially themes. You hear the song, and then people improvise on it. And I think what I like in psychotherapy is to have a structure, but to do a lot of improvisation. That I will mention my current book, which is under review. The title of the book is Bringing Psychotherapy to Life. And that's what I want to talk about. I'm going to contrast that. What I think ordinary psychotherapy is talking to people about problems in their life, not a new idea whatsoever, but it's been eclipsed by the development of all these specialized brands and techniques designed to treat psychiatric disorders and symptoms. And I don't want to criticize that. What I want to say is we need space for doing what I think a lot of patients want and a lot of therapists do, which is talk to people in ordinary language, in common sense about the trouble in their life, mostly relational trouble. And of course, the life includes the life of the mind. So I can accept the value of good, effective, efficient treatments for psychiatric disorders and symptoms. I wouldn't challenge it. I just think it's crazy, frankly, that we need hundreds of them, especially in light of what I'm going to talk about. What I want to do is, I declared, by the way, this was in 2013, I said, I practice plain old therapy. And so I'm delighted to have a forum where we're talking about what I call plain old therapy. And I said also that the main skill we need as therapists is skill in being human. These are very vague concepts, but I think we need some kind of broad framework perspective, and that's the way I think about it. So what I want to do now is give you an evidence-based critique of the dominance of evidence-based therapy. So actually, this is going to be evidence. Now, a lot of generalizations, but they're based on evidence, and there are all kinds of exceptions, of course. So the most important thing is that what has been shown over decades is that the common factors in psychotherapy, that is, the factors common to different brands or theories or whatever, practices, the common factors actually account for more of the effectiveness of the therapy than the differences among all these hundreds of therapies. Now, you'll find exceptions, but that's a broad, accurate generalization. The common factors have to do with the quality of the patient-therapist relationship. Carl Rogers, he in a way set the frame for this. Empathy, positive regard, genuineness, authenticity. And he researched them. Therapeutic alliance is probably the best researched common factor. I've been interested in mentalizing as a common factor, and recent books, wrote a book on trusting in psychotherapy. Trust is something we take for granted that we understand it. It's actually enormously complicated. And I was mostly interested in what makes a therapist trustworthy. Care is my current concern. And the book that I'm working on now, it's completed, but is called Bringing Psychotherapy to Life, as contrasted with focusing on specialized treatments. And again, I'm not saying we don't need those. They're valuable. I just want more space for what the five of us are interested in. And another big finding is that there are substantial differences between therapists in their effectiveness. Some therapists are, particularly excellent. Most therapists are ordinary. I'd group myself with them. And unfortunately, there's some therapists who are consistently ineffective. And of course, the differences between therapists and effectiveness are strongly related to the severity of the disorders, problems that the patients have. It doesn't take an enormous amount of skill, perhaps, to help somebody with less severe problems. So what I was led to, this is in the book I wrote about trust, is that we spend so much energy on developing therapies, and we need to think more about the development of therapists. And that's my talk today, is focused on the therapist's life. I will say that from the structure I think of it developmentally, what you learn professionally. I like the movement of psychotherapy integration, that we start somewhere and then we have to develop, learn about theories and methods and techniques, and it's a developmental process, and it needs to be integrated if it's going to be coherent. I have become a cat. That was interesting. Okay, so I think we need to think more about the development of therapists. That's what I want to talk about, and how we integrate professional knowledge. But the most important point I want to make is that what is crucial for our effectiveness is the development we have before we become therapists, our personal relational development. Then the further developmental challenge is, okay, what professional knowledge do we acquire, and training and skill? And it needs to be integrated into the kind of personal way we relate to people, how we think about people. And I do want to make a comment about science. I love science, but what I protest is scientism. And our field is I think, under the thrall of scientism, that everything has to be scientific, quote, evidence-based, and so forth. Mostly when I'm talking to people about their trouble, I'm not using science consciously, but I've been very interested in science, and it forms what I do. But to think that everything has to be scientific, I think, is oppressive. The idea I've developed is that science's majesty does not entitle it to a monarchy. So I want to share some research from consumer studies. There's a great group, an advocacy group for the kind of therapy a lot of us want to do. And I think the five of us are doing this. It's the Psychotherapy Action Network, an advocacy group. Linda Michaels is the founder of it. And they've done some really good current consumer studies. What do consumers want? The top item is they want to share their thoughts and feelings without feeling judged or shamed. Then another popular item is learn skills and coping strategies. And that overwhelmingly people say that they'd prefer a longer therapy that not only helps with symptoms, but gets to the root of their problems, than to have a shorter symptom-focused therapy only. The main barrier that consumers face is cost. And the healthcare system is directed, the managed care system, directed towards specialized therapies. And a lot of people just want what we're talking about doing, ordinary psychotherapy. The thing is, mostly you have to pay for that out of pocket. So I interpret this as people do want help with problems, specific help with problems and symptoms, but they want understanding and they want a confiding, trustworthy relationship. Michael Lambert, this is an older study, asked people what most helped them in the therapy they had. So the top response is being able to talk to an understanding person The personality of the therapist was very important, and encouragement to practice facing what bothered them, kind of exposure therapy. I think psychoanalysis was kind of an exposure, free associate, allow into your experience things that scare you. So I don't think that's a particularly new idea. So I have used attachment theory. We developed a specialized inpatient treatment for trauma at Menninger, and I discovered just by happenstance that attachment theory actually fit what I was struggling with working with these patients with a history of trauma. And I think that it's attachment theory really puts psychotherapy into context for me. There's a fabulous study done by Alan Strofe in Minnesota, studied longitudinal study from infancy to the time these initial participants became parents, followed them over their lifetime. Very elaborate study. And he wrote a wonderful book that I would like to promote, which is, the title is A Compelling Idea. And the gist of it is this, that we could think of our relational development, close relationship, as attachment relationships that begin developing in infancy, and then, peer relationships, you get to adulthood, your close relationships have evolved, and attachment is complicated in its development. There are different attachment strategies that infants begin learning, and these change your preferred strategies and your skill in connecting. Attachment has to do with connecting when you're in distress, and you need somebody to comfort and care for you. So we learn these strategies over the course of the lifetime, and psychotherapy gets inserted into this developmental trajectory as a potential attachment relationship. So that's when we come into the picture with our attachment capacities, the patient's capacities. And what we hope happens is that this therapy attachment relationship will broaden the patient's attachment capacities. It's good to have a good relationship with a therapist, but the point of it is developing attachments in other relationships. That is kind of laterally, you hope that the patient's capacities for attachment are developing in their relationships during the period of therapy, and then, of course, beyond the therapy. And I think that it's a very helpful way to think about the therapist's life as it relates to the conduct of psychotherapy. And another thing I want to say is that I think psychotherapists should be benefiting from being psychotherapists, because we have an enormous opportunity to develop skill in relating to people, particularly people who have great difficulty relating to us and other people. And that should enrich our lives and our own attachment capacities. Now, I'm going to end with a summary of some research that I discovered. I discover everything by chance. So this, I was very happy, kind of belatedly, to discover this work by David Orlinsky. What he did, it was a huge cadre of researchers who studied therapists' development. So when we think about trying to understand our patients from a developmental perspective, again, we're thinking about their early life, their current life. We're also thinking about, potentially how they might live in the future. Well, Orlinsky applied that framework to therapists. Now, this was all a self-report study, but it was very ambitious, multinational, multidisciplinary, and he had wound up with 12,000 therapists participating in this study. And it was a very elaborate self-assessment. asking the therapist about their family relationships, their close relationships in adulthood, their their relationships with their personal therapists and their relationships with their patients and how this all fit together. And by the way, I'm reading from notes, and these notes will be available to you because I'm going to cover a lot of detail here, and you can have it. I've summarized it. So I'll just go through the therapist-family relationships. This was interesting to me. Only 32% of the therapists basically said that the relationships in their family were good. 49% said fair, 20% said poor, and about 25% had relationships that were characterized by very significant adversity. And so we go from that to what are their personal relationships like in adulthood? And Orlinsky used this term genial caring. I was glad to see caring since my current book is about care. Genial caring, and 80% of therapists said their close relationships had that quality. It's a good genial caring is a good therapeutic kind of orientation in relationships. And then personal therapy, 80% of the therapists in this group had been in at least one treatment, and a number, many more than one. Most of them said that their well-being was good, so they were not seeking therapy so much for trouble as for growth, actually. And the vast majority said they benefited from it, which is encouraging. Only 5% said that they got little or no benefit from their personal psychotherapy. So then how does all this play out in the quality of their relationships with patients? Well, generally, the 75% of the therapists said that they had what Orlinsky called healing involvement. That is, they felt effective, connected, and the therapy that they were doing was rewarding. Interestingly, in that 75%, about 70% said it was relatively low stress. About 30% said it was high stress. I'd put myself in the healing involvement, but in the high stress. I've been working with hospital patients, suicidal self-harm, very severe psychopathology, personality disturbance. A lot of it was stressful. I would say it was very fulfilling, but I think I would have wound up in that bunch. So 20% of the therapists had not engaged in personal therapy. They generally had a low level of healing involvement, which I think is really important. So there was a 91% who said they had genial, caring relationships in their adulthood, had high involvement. So good current adult relationships, high involvement. A lot of them said that they had benefited from therapy. So when you look at the early adversity and the generally kind of mediocre family upbringing experience, I think therapy probably did help a lot of these people. It's very encouraging, of course, to us therapists. We're among the most enthusiastic consumers of psychotherapy, which is, I think, a good thing. So I'll conclude by talking about Orlinsky's taxonomy of therapists. I think this is interesting. So he grouped the therapists into different categories. Normal caring therapists, reasonably good family, high genial caring adult relationships, high life satisfaction. 55% were in that, quote, normal caring group. An interesting group is 18% he called the wounded healers, which is kind of a stereotype of psychotherapy. It's not a huge number, 18%. These were therapists who had had a history of trauma, but also typically some protective relationships, and they'd had psychotherapy. And these were exceptionally high in their sense of the quality of their therapy relationships. Now, the concerning bunch is indifferent healers, 15%, basically low in, satisfying adult relationships, low well-being, little personal therapy, kind of detached, disaffected, disengaged, 15%. And then 11% he labeled troubled healers, low in close relationships, high stress, low well-being, and again, little participation in therapy. So if we just summarize this globally, how are therapists doing? 75% we would say would be doing well, 25% doing fairly poorly. That's a pretty significant, this is a glass 3/4 full and 1/4 empty. Again, I would say from my reading of the data that personal therapy is really important. And again, this is limited. It's all self-report. But Orlinsky says, well, okay, it's only self-report. You don't have any validation elsewhere. But how the therapist's experience, I think, is very important. And and this is what I think we need to be thinking more along these lines. And also, he made the caveat that these are categories. This is a cross section. It's not longitudinal, and like attachment, people can change, and indeed that's what we hope for. So I think the implication of this research on therapists is that this is very important for therapist effectiveness. And again, the effectiveness, as I see it, skill in being human, is going to have to do with the quality of their relationships. And I think attachment theory is a really good way to think about the crux of what we need for skill in being human. And I'm particularly enthusiastic about it because it's based on tons of research. So I criticize this domination of therapy by research, but on the other hand, the research is enormously helpful. And I think this is totally consistent with what our quintet, as I think of it, is talking about here, how you connect with people in a trustworthy and caring way is how I would say it. And I would conclude now by just saying that skill in being human. I think of Jeremy Holmes, some of you may know. A lot of us say therapy is an art, and it does have artful qualities, but he uses the idea of a craft. And my sense is a craft, mastery of a craft is the work of a lifetime. And so I think this skill in being human is a lifetime developmental project. And I do think us therapists are privileged to have the opportunity to develop trust and care in relationships with a lot of people who confide in us and also challenge us and teach us how to work with really, really serious personal problems that can help us in all our relationships. Therapy, I just see therapy as being one among a bunch of attachment relationships. And this relates to both the power of therapy and the limitations. The power is that you could have an attachment relationship that would really enable a patient to be more connected to other people, would make a huge difference in that patient's life. And I imagine a lot of us have had a good amount of experience with that. But the other side of it is that attachments are all intertwined, and the limitations of therapy is exactly the same thing. It's one attachment relationship in a lifetime. And then you've got powerful early attachment relationships, powerful current attachment relationships, and going forward, going back, into life with powerful relationships that can have adverse effects. It's quite a thing then for psychotherapy. And we haven't even talked about culture, the society, the trouble with care in society. So there's lots of reason to be modest about our ability to do. One other thing I want to say about the specialists is I think it's fine to specialize and we need to embrace this, that, or the other thing. But I think that research said that a sense of superiority about your method is an illusion. This is the findings of the common factors. So I will stop there and let other people chime in and riff using the jazz metaphor.
Well,
Sure.
yeah,
That was amazing. We're
Yes,
gonna
yes.
talk a little as a group about your ideas, and if everybody could put your questions in the chat. I know the chat's been fairly active with good suggestions for people, and so that's and caring about one another in the chat. So fantastic. So I think Ross, you were going to start us off.
I just kept thinking, first of all, about this quintet and how much issues of improvisation have come up for this group, and how you started this conversation talking about jazz, and where our relationship with uncertainty fits within our development to be most human, and our development as therapists. And I guess I'm asking of the entire group, where does it rest for you in your work?
Well, I'll comment. I think uncertainty is the territory, really, and there's this idea of embracing uncertainty, and I love it. Mystery, not knowing, and all of this. I think this is hope is all about uncertainty. You're between despair and presumption, and it's living with that uncertain ambiguity. So that's where consciousness lives, is in uncertainty. And and jazz, I think you don't know where it's going, moment to moment, literally. So that's a great comment.
Yeah.
Ross, I let you start us off with that question because the five of us right here are living in uncertainty, not knowing exactly what will emerge.
Oh,
And and uh,
yeah.
and I'm going to talk about this in a couple of weeks, talking about improvisation and play, which is really about this state of uncertainty. And I mean, John, what I've heard you talk about is actually how extraordinary it is to be with somebody who's an ordinary therapist. And I think what that part of what that means is it's courageous and scary and daring as we develop in our career to actually get to a point of uncertainty and to not know, as opposed to know these acronyms or skills to teach or various things, but to be with somebody and not know, so that we can actually create a bridge and a place of understanding and curiosity is not easy.
Yeah, I'd like to make one more comment about this. See, science is about certainty, laws. Give us the certainty, give us the manual. And the scary thing is, what if you don't have a manual? And the scarier thing is you don't. You may have it, but if you use it, enough said.
I think another aspect to your question, Ross, is I think about one of the aspects of living with uncertainty is living with anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
the anxiety of not knowing. And I find it's a lot easier to live with and live through anxiety with other people who are recognizing it, seeing it. It's almost like a collective sense, just like here we are trying together to muddle through the uncertainty of this rift together. And so much of our really human work is muddling through
Mhm.
uncertainty. And, we may have wishes for these islands of clarity, but a lot of it is uncertain. So there's something here about anxiety and the role that other people
Mhm.
play in helping us manage that.
Yeah,
It's really important.
yeah, yeah. Michael, I think anxiety and insecurity, right? A
Yeah,
sense of insecurity. Yeah, yeah.
we have to, have.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about the anxiety and the comfort and discomfort of not knowing or being
Mhm.
uncertain. And I'm thinking about your comments about science, John, because yes, the science, it can get so reductionistic and prevent us from thinking.
Mm.
On the other hand, if I don't have an awareness of I guess I'm appreciating my science background or some of
Mhm.
my science background because if I don't have an appreciation of diagnoses or what I see kind of coming at me, if somebody's very psychotic, um, I want to be able to attach, right, and connect. But my science lets me understand some of the phenomenon that come at me, so then I'm not as afraid. So then I can hopefully foster attachment. Um, so I just, yeah, I'm thinking about all
Yeah,
of these pieces and what we have to be open to and informed by.
Yeah,
yeah,
I think the
yeah.
comment on that, it's a critical point because so I'm saying you superimpose professional on the personal. I would have been completely out of luck working in this trauma program. I knew nothing about PTSD, dissociation, DID, all this stuff. And, educated the patients, wrote books about it. So this is where therapy and friendship kind of part company because
Yeah,
we do need this knowledge. We got a century of knowledge, as critical as we all are of DSM. This is the century of knowledge has gone into this. So I completely agree with that. But it's the freedom that I'm thinking that that life experience needs to be and relational experience in the therapy. But I was dead in the water
right, right.
when
Yeah,
Yeah.
I started with this.
yeah,
The
yeah,
Yeah.
experience with dissociative identity disorder.
right.
I didn't have a clue.
Yeah,
Patients having blackouts. What is that? She
right.
wasn't drinking. I didn't, so you're so clueless.
Hmm.
Patients cutting herself. Oh, this feels so good. Let me tell you, it
Hmm.
feels like
Hmm.
what? I believed her, but
Uh-huh.
I had no idea what I was doing. And the whole bunch of us had no idea creating this program.
Right,
So
right.
Mike Coping is writing a lot of books.
Hmm. Hmm.
I,
Hmm.
I feel like the two of you are talking about a seriously playful approach to science in the sense that actually the diagnosis mean more to you than it does if you're just certain about the thing. It's I'm using this as a tool to get me somewhere, not as a definition of the person. And so the thing becomes yours, just like a
Yeah,
toy becomes a child's. It's something
yeah.
outside of you that becomes
That's
part of you. And
yeah,
that's not scientificism.
right,
That's
Right.
right.
that's using knowledge and wisdom
Yeah, yeah.
to make you a better
Well,
therapist.
John mentions the DSM. I was working on a talk for something else, but I was thinking, it's such it's such crap, and that it's it's phenomena, right? And
Yeah.
that's important. It's phenomena, but what I've always been yearned to is what's underneath that and what's driving it. It doesn't matter to me if I see the phenomenon and have a
Right,
list of criteria.
right.
What matters is where's it coming from and how do I understand it? And
Mhm.
yeah, and that's playing with it too. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, there's some questions in the chat that have to do with what what our patients or clients bring into the office, and they bring in ideas that I need a therapy labeled this, labeled DBT, CBT, ACT, what you pick your brand. Or when things kind of get going, they'll say, I think I need to move to schema therapy or whatever it might be. But there's an education of people in the world about that they need a thing. And also there's a question here about also wanting results. So how do we
Mm.
sustain kind of this curiosity and not knowing stance while embracing science in the face of some of the pressures actually that our patients are bringing in, or actually insistence.
Mhm.
It's certainly true, Jeff. We've all seen it. We do see it. But this is why I mention these consumer studies. They're good, solid studies.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of this is true. And if there's a good, efficient method for a specific problem, go for it. If the person can't sleep, they're having nightmares, there are treatments for that. Help them. Panic attacks, yes. Yes. But we shouldn't be cowed by that because these consumer studies are really significant. They really do want to do a lot of people what we're saying, yeah, we do that.
I found that the whole thing about the therapists, I don't remember what percentage, that have not had therapy. And there is a movement about, I find this extraordinarily concerning, even within UCLA, that they used to advocate for all trainees, had to be in your own therapy. There were good reasons for that, as evidenced by the research you're citing, John. But there is now a thrust because of concerns of some of those relationships to turn the psychotherapy that trainees are getting into supervision
Hmm.
so that they're not being urged to get their own treatment. That horrifies me in terms of what's going to be generated and how these people come to an understanding of themselves, which is, so key, I think, to us. How many
Well,
years did I spend on a couch? It was worth it, right?
yeah, no,
Yeah.
I wonder about, one of the things you alluded to at the end, John, when you talked about culture,
Mhm.
because in some ways we're speaking to elements of what I think of as part of the social culture,
Mm.
economic culture,
Yeah,
that there, the emphasis on results, the emphasis on,
yeah,
what insurance might want of us. So in some ways, what you're calling for is, in my ears, an invitation to be countercultural,
yes,
certain respect, to allow for a curiosity, to allow for an uncertainty that, may not be culturally uniformly valued and in fact
Hmm.
devalued. And so
yeah,
part of, I think, our challenge is in terms of the treasure of ordinary psychotherapy is how do we navigate and muddle through what in some instances may be countercultural.
yes. I do want to comment this book I just wrote. We have an extremely individualistic culture. This is hugely problematic. Patients feel like if you're mature, you've got trouble, you take care of it. That's the height of maturity. I say depending on other people emotionally is the height of maturity, really. I mean, you got secure attachment, secure base and safe haven. I mean, these things go together. But the other thing, Michael, there's a section of this book that's titled Imagine a Political Capacity to Care. The book is about, and the imagine is the key word. Imagine what it would be like if we lived in a culture where there was a political investment in care. I could go off on this point, but so this is when I talked about the limitations of psychotherapy. without a culture that supports care,
Mhm,
not to mention trustworthiness.
mhm, mhm.
This we're really, it is countercultural.
I also think being a good parent is countercultural in this culture. Being a good friend is countercultural. Being a good colleague at work is countercultural. So just all of those things are now moving against what
Yeah.
this, and I'm also thinking of the beautiful job Michael White did in narrative therapy, where he was saying the culture is bringing people in and they're problem saturated, and how do we not deny the diagnosis, but help them build a relationship with the diagnosis, help them build a relationship with their suffering. And then his voice resonates in this conversation, this the narrative therapy voice.
Mhm, mhm,
Lots of ideas in the chat. There's a whole world going on in the the chat that I can't keep up with. That's we have a lot of very bright and wise people here with us today who are providing information, and much of it is um, improvising back really to what this group is
Mm.
saying. And I find myself wondering to the group about training, and in this conversation about the balance of science and exploration, or science knowing and not knowing. I think do you see not knowing as kind of a developmental capacity, because there is something really to actually um, learning about elements of therapy, and what is a frame, and what is um, and what is safety, and what are diagnoses, and what are approaches, and at what point, um, John, others, do we think about actually allowing ourselves to be there too? Because I when I see as people training on inpatient units for years and kind of losing themselves, and then actually struggling for years to actually find that it's okay to bring elements of themselves back into the room.
Mm.
So how do we train this that you're
Hmm.
talking about?
Well, I think the first thing I say to young people is that, they've developed before they begin as therapists a lot of what is most crucial to their work as therapists. It's that personal development remains true throughout the lifetime. This is again, as to Robin's point, yeah, you have to learn a lot of stuff. And there's so much stuff out there. This is overwhelming to people. They think they got to know all these T's before they'll be able to do therapy.
mhm,
That's the integration thing. But I think what Michael said, people are scared. They don't, they feel ill-equipped. They don't take their own knowledge, personal knowledge, seriously enough. So they're not starting from zero. They're starting from most of what's important. And it's a lifetime.
mhm,
I had a young person in a workshop I gave. He was scared like this. He said, "I feel so anxious. There's all this stuff." I said, "Well, I hope you feel that way throughout your career."
mhm, 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 mhm. Well, and to Michael's point too, there's such a, I think people get so anxious because there's such a feeling that you must consume and you must gather all of this knowledge and you must know, as opposed to trusting your capacity to think about things and to consider and to not, and to have the courage not to know and to be curious. And how do we, help to foster this thinking and reflective function, if you will, that um, to stay in that space rather than acquire.
that that's what's so scary about this, the removing the demand or the request that people get into therapy, I think, because I think it does drive you to be able to deal better with uncertainty in the unknown. and to be flexible in thought. I mean, I think that that's what it's supposed to be getting you to, you know,
Mhm.
and to trust the unsaid known, you know, the knowing things that aren't
Yeah.
wordable, you know, and if you don't have that ability, I don't know how you can do therapy.
Mhm.
I do think all that knowledge is important, but if you only have that knowledge and not the ability to deal with the
Right.
noetic, I don't know what's
Right.
left, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and read some of these comments in the chat for the panel just to see what comes up for us at the end. Some wise thoughts here. Without mentioning names, here's one that says, I believe it requires great developmental psychic maturity to tolerate not knowing, to not be threatened by the varying levels of anxiety. And I think that's what we're talking about when we're going to call this the extraordinary nature of ordinary therapy, that it actually does take courage to do what we're talking about potentially on some level. There's and I like from, good to see you, Frank. Know all the theories, a Jungian quote, know all the theories, master all the techniques, but as you touch a human soul, be just another human soul.
Mm, mm,
And um, and I think the importance is to build confidence and be comfortable sitting in discomfort and be transparent that we are human and we will never know everything. And that the path of learning goes through the swamp of confusion. Um, yeah. And then I wouldn't
Jeff,
trust
are we
the
going
cat.
to be able to collect all of these
Yeah,
thoughts
yeah, we'll save the
and
chat.
Yeah,
trap
we
them and
should.
feed them
Yes.
into our father further? Good.
Yes. And then it's a great one here. I wouldn't trust a tattoo artist who didn't have a tattoo. And I think to that, who as a therapist doesn't sit in an office really uh, connecting to those, like what did you call them, John? Genial, caring relationships
Right. Yeah.
that we ourselves have had and bringing them through and really with the experience that we all rest on the shoulders of others who've helped us.
Thinking about our own attachment through our collaboration,
hmm
less out of fear, but out of this yearning to create and collaborate.
hmm Yeah.
Yeah. This is a treasure for us. I think we've
hmm
felt it that way.
Mhm.
Michael came up with the idea of treasure.
hmm
Mhm. Mhm.
It emerged as the third in this quintet.
Yeah. And I think the theme here of all of us really knowing science, learning science, studying science, and being fans of what we know. But how do we actually develop the parts of us that don't know and bring those um, into the room? And can we talk about that part? And isn't that actually ultimately how we're human? Because what do we ultimately know? I mean, I think this is the question we as a group are riffing around. And how do we be present with another person?
Ross said something that I think is hugely important. The unthought known, the idea
Mm.
of therapy is that none of us know how it worked. There's so much that we can't articulate.
Mhm.
Articulate like this little bit of what we learn and know. And, we have our theories about it, and there's this massive underground of how we can develop at the unthought known level, intuition, what babies do, we
hmm
continue to do it. That's priceless.
hmm
We're gonna end here in a
Yeah.
minute, and I'll end with um, someone quoting you back here, John. Many, many um, thank yous for the presentation. I think the kind of daringness to riff around this question. Really, daringness, is that a word? Courage. How about that's probably a better word.
Probably.
But here you go. One of my favorite quotes from John: "Science's majesty doesn't entitle it to be a monarchy." And our appreciation
That's really good.
that, John. So thank you everybody for joining us. We are at the hour. I hope you can come back. I think we're on in a couple weeks, and we'll send announcements again. And I hope people have signed up. Also, when you signed up initially, you could sign up for actually 4 and then scroll down to the 5th to actually get Michael's talk, which is last. But I'll be talking to us about play and how we can conceptualize play and what happens if we're not playful with an integration of ideas from improvisation next time we get together. So thank you everybody for being here. Hope this is stimulating some thoughts for the day, for the week, for the weeks ahead, and thank you so much for the chat.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.
Thank you.